Hello, welcome back to Trench Talk, because you need to be told what to listen to. I'm your host, Flight of Icarus from MetalTrenches.com, and I'm very excited today, as you may have already noticed, that we are going to move our audio quality in the right direction this time. I finally caved in and bought a new microphone, or a microphone, I should say, because before I was just recording with an iPhone and having to convert it and do what I could with it, and no more of that. So very excited to hear the vastly improved sound that we're going to have moving forward. As always, please make sure to like, subscribe, give us a rating, share, whatever platform you're on, drop us a comment. It really makes a difference, and it allows our audience to grow a lot quicker. I've been happy to see all of the new subscribers and new listeners. We've been doing kind of okay for a starting podcast, but I want to really get the word out there. And also, again, we do have a second channel called Metal Health with an N in parentheses, so Mental Health, Metal Health. That channel is more specifically dedicated to talking about pop culture and other issues through a mental health lens, politics as well. So check that out if that is a topic that you're interested in. You can just search Metal Trenches on iTunes in particular, and that will take you to it. It should be the second option next to this one. So today, I felt like it was high time that we covered a black metal album in truth. I'm not really counting Psy's latest album just because that is definitely more of a progressive metal album. So I thought I would reach back actually to 2017, to one of my favorites of that year, and we're going to talk about Dodecahedron with Quintessence. Dodecahedron are a Tilburg-based black metal band formed roughly in 2009. I've seen some varying dates, but an interview with one of the band members, they specifically said that things kind of took shape around that year. The name and concept of dodecahedron is one based on the 5 platonic solids. I guess the first 4 represent specific elements, and then the last, the dodecahedron, is representing the whole or the universe. And so they're trying to convey this concept of the whole through their music. Band is great for fans of Blood aus Nord, Deathspell Omega, Leviathan, and Nightbringer. Quintessence is their sophomore album. It is out through Seasons of Mist. I guess they used a lot of numerology in the songwriting, again related to these platonic solids. I heard the number 3 mentioned a lot in an example. It's not entirely clear to me. I was trying to make sense of, again, what one of the band members was saying in an interview, but it really was kind of going over my head. But suffice it to say, they use some interesting kind of approach to how they're writing the songs, using, again, numbers and these kind of geometric concepts. I also heard the golden ratio brought up at one point. In any case, Quintessence is a devouring beast of an album. It's this densely concentrated chaos going on, and it has kind of a similar sort of avant-garde vibe, again, to the likes of Deathspell Omega. It's not totally out there, but there is some experimentation going on. Compositions do kind of drift through a lot of different modes, so to speak. And what I find with bands that do that, whether it be Deathspell on the black metal end of things or from a more death metal perspective like Gorguts, to me it can sound very like meandering and kind of just wandering and sort of just seeing where things go. Whereas with Quintessence, things feel a lot more focused and directed. I compared it to kind of the difference between watching Lost and watching the latest season of Twin Peaks. Now, I'm not going to totally bash Lost because when it first came on, I really enjoyed it. My family watched it every week. But it became apparent the further and further you got into it from season to season that things were kind of just being written as they went. There wasn't a clear idea of exactly where things were going. They just sort of let the narrative sort of take over. And I guess that can be interesting sometimes, but for me, it just felt like things were falling apart. Whereas with Twin Peaks, you've got this great mind of David Lynch, who always has a very clear idea of what he wants the arc of his story to be. He knows where he wants it to begin. He knows the key beats that he wants to happen as things progress, and then what he wants the ending to be. And whether or not you're happy with the ending or feel like it makes sense is a different issue. But there's a clear idea in mind of where things are going. But he's also open to the idea of kind of getting dreamy, as he puts it, and sort of improvising along the way and just toying with ideas as they come throughout the process of making it through this narrative. So that's how I feel about Dodecahedron. There's a very clear vision, despite the fact that there are some elements that do feel kind of improvisational and organic as things develop. This album's also highly technical, kind of in the vein of things like Imperial Triumphant at times. Great shifting palette of drums, the guitars just waging kind of mental warfare. It's this blazing hellfire sound leading to a cacophony of like blistering noise capped off with these really wretched vocals. They've got a little bit of reverb on them too, so that they're just really commanding. It really does feel like you're just traveling downwards and downwards, but also outwards too, because there is this sort of evolutionary piece of it. I'd likened it to like a twisted version of the final evolution scene from 2001: A Space Odyssey. So surprise, surprise, another Kubrick reference. I wonder who Flight's favorite director is. But in any case, if you, for some reason, haven't seen that movie, you're a plebe and you should go see it right now. But in any case, the astronaut goes on this very kind of visual journey where he sort of ages rapidly and dies, but then is transported interdimensionally and however you want to describe it, and becomes this sort of super being, space baby type thing, which may sound really stupid if you haven't seen it, but I swear it's really cool on screen. But I get that same vibe here, where it's like you're going through this experience and you're evolving and you're transforming, but in a much darker, more twisted way, to the point where it sounds like it's a very painful process this time around. In my written review, I described it as an unpredictable descent into the underworld, and I'd add on to that again that, you know, you're moving through hell, and like I said, you're moving downwards but also outwards. So it's like this kind of cleansing hellfire where you're going through this experience and becoming something new on the other side. And every song does this great job of conveying that kind of idea and that feeling, right down to Interlude, which is literally just called Interlude. And there's no vocals, and it is exactly how it's described. But that track is existentially terrifying. It's got these great tribal kind of ritualistic drums, these atmospheric sounds lingering around, steadily grooving guitars. There's even some kind of genty rhythmic elements to the guitars, which makes sense because the band has also stated that Meshuggah is an influence of theirs. So I'm hearing some of that kind of subtly leaking in. But in any case, despite the fact that this is just an instrumental on the album, it is haunting, it's harrowing, it's an experience much more potent than any modern horror movie you could see, and it's just a really fantastic moment, and again, just drives home the fact that every single piece of this album is an impressive work of art. And then there's also some more kind of melodic, even ethereal moments, especially with the gorgeous dodecahedron, an ill-defined air of otherness. It feels like at this point we've kind of moved past those more painful parts of our transformation into a more introspective kind of third eye meditation. Makes me think of Tool, especially listening to Lateralis. But this isn't some radio-friendly stuff still. You kind of have this lingering, again, kind of a drony atmosphere that plays out. A lot of the instrumentation is dropping out. And then there's still this final violent push to the higher astral plane, as I see it. And this point is even kind of driven home as the vocalist repeats the line, "The death of your body. The death of your body." And it's I could be misinterpreting this whole thing, but again, I've said before that what I like about music is being able to kind of take home whatever it's conveying to me and how it's being kind of, brought into me. I'm listening to it, it's being processed in my brain and in my body as a certain experience, and then it's coming out in my own particular perspective on it. And so this is just sort of my take on what Quintessence is all about. So ultimately, this is a really challenging album filled with some really powerful concepts and amazingly technical musicianship. And strangely, it really flies by, though, thanks to really strong dynamics and just really seamless flow from track to track and within the tracks. And even though this album is actually 42 minutes long, it feels more like 30. I was listening to it again, just running through it as I was driving today, and I got to a point where I was just like, oh shoot, it's like almost over already. Am I wrong about the runtime? And I double checked. I'm like, nope, it's 42 minutes, but man, feels like a lot less than that in a good way. So even kind of some time compression kind of stuff happening there, which seems fitting given everything I've talked about so far. In terms of favorite tracks, Octahedron, Harbinger, Dodecahedron, which I just mentioned, and then also Interlude, one of my favorite tracks on the album, despite the fact that it's just an instrumental. But once again, these guys, it's clear with Dodecahedron that they're not just going to throw any old thing on the album. I have a lot of problems with bands constantly just doing the obligatory intros and outros just because they felt like they needed to, and it just sort of feels like an arbitrary thing. Not so here. These guys, if it's going to be on the album, they are going to take some time really thinking through what they want it to be. In terms of ratings, I gave it a 10 for enjoyability. Despite how dense and sometimes abrasive this album can be and how exploratory it is, it's really engaging and really enjoyable and really re-listenable. Going back to, again, my other examples of albums that are more sort of exploratory and even avant-garde, I'm very impressed by those albums, but they're not albums that I tend to continue to throw on and listen to over and over and over again. Going back to kind of movie comparisons again, I always think of Requiem for a Dream. From the amazing director to the incredible cast and acting and the book that it's based on, that movie is one of my favorites, but I'm not going to watch it that often because it is a really rough experience to sit through. I probably only watch that movie once every 2 years or so, if even that, even though I love it. But with Quintessence, with an album like this, I will play it over and over and over again. Like, I'm ready to listen to it again just talking about it now, and I just listened to it maybe an hour ago. So you can keep coming back to it. Really great stuff. Musicianship, I've already mentioned. Very technical, very impressive from all musician standpoints. The guitars are incredible. The drums are really great. And not only that, but, you know, they can play the faster, more kind of overtly proficient parts to just prove that, yeah, we really know how to play our instruments, but they also know when to scale back and slow things down or turn down the volume a little bit so that they can just really prove that they've got a lot of different strengths and ways that they can work on things. And then I gave it a 9 for innovation. Not quite a 10 because, again, being a listener of things like Deathspell, this isn't completely unprecedented. I have heard things like this before. I tend to reserve 10 for, like, I've legitimately never heard an album like this in my life. But, you know, still an A, still way up there. This is definitely among bands that are willing to push boundaries and just sort of do them and do what feels right regardless of, you know, what the status quo may be. So all of that adding up to a total score of 9.7, very close to a 10. Again, one of my favorite albums of 2017, definitely in my top 10. If you want to check out more, I will leave a link in the description of kind of all of my favorite albums from 2017 from both the first half and second half of the year across the various rating scales. All right, let's move on to shoutouts. First up, we've got Jonestown with Diet Love. Jonestown is a no-nonsense, genty metalcore band out of Brighton, UK, with an album coming out via Long Branch Records. This is for fans of groups like After the Burial, Within the Ruins, and to an extent Architects. I'd say the heavier parts of Architects, not so much the more radio-friendly, kind of melodic chorus piece of it. These guys do not sing. It is straight up screaming all the way, very balls-to-the-wall, aggressive stuff, with really catchy, groovy riffing. Not the most original thing you're going to hear, but I'll tell you, start to finish, every single song on this album is a winner, and I have a hard time getting this out of my rotation. I've been listening to it a lot. Next, we've got In Twilight's Embrace with Lava. This is a Polish black metal band. The album is out through Left Hand Sounds. I got into these guys back in 2015 when they dropped The Grim Muse, which was a little bit more of a like Gothenburg influenced album. Lots of melodic death metal elements leaking in. Definitely some At the Gates vibes. And I really enjoyed it. That's another album I really recommend. But since then, they've kind of gone through a transition where they've scaled things back to a more traditional, basic black metal sound. And just because of my expectations, that turned me off for a little while. They dropped an EP, and then they dropped another album. And I was a little bit lukewarm on those, but I feel like with Lava, they're kind of getting their footing again. They're still in that more second wave sound, but it just sounds better. It sounds less repetitive. The guitars are kind of picking up again. There are some kind of little melodeath influences that leak in, kind of like Dissection. But if you're into bands like Take, Immortal, and Blaze of Perdition, I'd recommend checking this one out. And then last but not least, we've got Brand of Sacrifice with the Interstice, or the Interstice. via Unique Leader Records. This is a slamming death metal, deathcore band. Before you get turned off because I said deathcore, they are very technical, so it's a much more kind of expansive and dynamic approach to the genre that I think should please both death metal and deathcore fans alike. They also use some synth elements, so if you're into stuff like Born of Osiris, particularly their earlier material, this will be right up your alley. Also, Within Destruction, earlier Whitechapel, things of that nature, you're gonna dig this. Really heavy, fun stuff. All right, and since we got some time, I wanted to share a little bit of news. I've been kind of debating how I wanted to talk about this because it has to do with some band drama, and I'm always big on being drama-free. And I'm also of the opinion that there are 2 or more sides to every story, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. At the end of the day, I wasn't there to see how things unfolded and what happened, so I'm not going to make assumptions. I'm just going to kind of state what I know so far. So I'm a big fan of the band Absu, which is a black metal band out of Texas. They're really known for their super technical guitars and drumming. The drummer is also the vocalist. They've been around for quite some time, and we've been waiting, or at least I've been waiting for years for them to drop what I believe is supposed to be their final album. And given how good the last one was after their comeback, I was super stoked to hear this. But unfortunately, from what I'm hearing, the band may have broken up. And again, this has happened before, so it may not be the end. But the guitar player, who is super talented, really incredible player, Vis Krom, has stated on social media that the band broke up. Vis Krom came out as transgender, and from what I could glean from the post, their perspective was that this had caused some tension within the band and may have played into the breakup. Again, I don't know these people personally, so I'm not going to throw assumptions out there. I haven't seen a response from the other band members, but it kind of is what it is. My one takeaway here is, one, I really hope that we still get to hear this final album, and I hope that the band can work it out, because they're just amazing musicians. And on that related note, part 2 of that is I wish all of them the best. I'm a big fan of Vis Krom to the point that I would actually list them among my favorite metal guitarists. I come back and listen to them play all the time and am constantly in awe. I saw them play live here in Portland at one point, and they're just as good live as they are on recording. And so I hope that regardless what happens moving forward, that this ends up being a good thing for Vis Krom, and we get to hear more from them on some sort of project in the future, because that would be a huge loss. I really love the bass player too. Fun to watch his antics on stage, and just a solid performer all around. And then, of course, Prescriptor McGovern, too, one of the best drummers out there right now, really. And he has such a trademark style to his kind of staccato black metal vocals. Kind of thing. Really good stuff. So I hope that they're all able to move forward from this and something good can come out of it. And that is it for this episode. As always, thanks for listening. Please do not forget to like, comment, subscribe, give us a rating. And also, in addition to checking us out on social media, we have a Patreon. We actually got our first patron, and like I said, every dollar counts. Don't feel like you're insulting us if you're like, well, if I'm going to be a patron, I feel like I should give at least $5 or $10. You don't have to. $1 adds up. If everybody who listens and everybody who visits the site just gives $1 a month, of couch change, it will become something bigger. We have expenses. I mean, buying this microphone was, not a cheap deal. I'm not in dire straits, but basically this site is, I put a lot of time into it. I end up putting money into it. We're not getting any ad revenue. We're not really making money at this point, and that's not my intent, but it would help make sure that things not only continue moving forward, but I can hopefully in the future maybe even pay somebody to help with some site redesigns and improvements and support the other writers that are contributing to the site and, pay for some advertising maybe. All that stuff would allow this to get bigger and better and become a stronger experience for you all. So check out Metal Trenches on Patreon and consider giving. There are some tiers now as well, depending on how much you give, that can give you things like early access to the podcast. But that aside, thanks as always for listening. That's the most important thing. And I will see you next time.